Hey everyone, welcome to The Leader's Edge, your path to personal and leadership growth. I'm your host, Steve Steele, alongside my co-host and partner in leadership, Ernie DeCumos. As certified speakers, coaches, and corporate facilitators, we're dedicated to bringing you powerful principles to fuel your leadership journey and personal growth. Now, whether you're an entrepreneur just starting out, a new leader taking the reins, or a seasoned pro looking to refine your skills, this show is for you. We'll be diving deep into personal growth strategies to help you strengthen your mindset and leadership abilities. But before we jump in, a huge shout out to all of our amazing listeners. Thank you so much for joining us each and every week. We wouldn't be here without your amazing and incredible support. Now let's get down to business and help you unlock your full potential. Ernalita de Kumos, how are you doing today, partner?
It's so weird when I hear my full name. Good morning, partner, Mr. Cecil. I'm fantastic. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing good. Been fighting a little bit of technological issues, but we're here and we're good to go. And I'm excited. So, yeah, absolutely doing well. But, Ernie, take a minute and share with us our special guest today.
Yes, actually, our special guest today is not a stranger to the network, which is
Mm-mm.
Voice America. Our guest is the president and CEO of MD Consulting and host of the Voice America podcast, Leading with Intention. She has been a trained executive coach since 2003 and, as an accredited master coach, has logged over, partner, get this,
Wow.
5,000 coaching hours with
Mm.
on 6 continents in over 15 industries. She is a survivor of childhood trauma, workplace micro trauma, and has complex PTSD. Despite being a high school dropout, she has achieved 7 business certifications, an Associate and Bachelor of Science in Management, and a
Wow.
Master of Science in Industrial and Organizational Psychology. She has leveraged her traumatic past and made it her mission to shift behavior and empower leaders to be more impactful and influential. She has compiled her personal journey and coaching methodology into her newest book, The Survive and Thrive Toolkit for Leaders, published by Mango Publishing Group. Everyone, please help me welcome Miss Monique Daigneault to the green room.
Ah, Monique, so glad to have you here. Wow.
Thank you so much, Steve and Ernie. Boy, you two are full of energy. I love it.
Well, thank you so much for that. We appreciate it. I, I'm looking at your bio and I'm going, my goodness gracious, Monique, it's loaded up. 5,000 hours, man. That is crazy. You've been working at this thing really. But I just have a real quick question. What is workplace micro trauma? What is that? I mean, that's not part of what we're talking about today, but just can
Right,
you
right.
can you tell me what that is?
I did a lot of research on that when I wrote my book, and micro trauma. So that is considered small traumas
Mm,
compared to large traumas like war or
Mhm,
assault, things like that, or a car accident. So micro
mhm.
trauma and in the workplace would be things that are very subtle behaviors,
Ah,
words, actions that are very subtle to the point where at first you may not even think it has affected you, but they build up over time. So it could be bullying. It could be a
mhm,
boss that withholds feedback. So you never
mhm,
know how you're doing. The kind of boss that might say, well, if you do something wrong, I'll let you know, but otherwise just assume everything's fine.
mhm,
Very subtle things. It could be a coworker that is giving you the cold shoulder, or a
mm,
coworker that's being very difficult to work with, or someone that's being condescending toward you, or someone that is condescending toward you in front of a group of people, like in a meeting. These things subtly chip away at an employee's self-confidence,
mhm,
self-esteem,
mhm,
causing them to be walking on eggshells because they're never quite sure how they're going to be treated. And subtle because not everyone will recognize that it's trauma. Some people think, well, that's just the way it is in the workplace.
mhm.
So
wow.
very different than
Wow.
really overt trauma.
Yeah, that has nothing to do with what we're going to talk about today, but thank you for that
Thank
because
you.
that was very interesting to me because I wanted to know what that was. That sounds like all of us at some point go through some of that
Yes.
in our workplace. So yeah, but today, Monique, we're going to actually dive into your book a little bit. You know, leadership is developed from within, right? And whether
Yes.
you're leading a team or you're leading a small business or a large corporation, you must first really know how to effectively lead yourself. And so, based on your newly released book, The Survive and Thrive Toolkit for Leaders, you're going to take us through a framework to help us develop and maintain balance in our personal life so that we can be more successful in our professional life. Did I get that right? Does that sound about
Exactly
right?
right. Yes.
And there's 8 dimensions of wellness to enhance the leadership skills. So Monique, I'm going to let
Yes.
you dive in. We've got about 3 segments here, and you've got 8 of them to go over. So let's just dive in and get started. And Ernie and I will jump in and ask questions as we move along. Does that sound good to you?
Yes, perfect. Well,
Awesome.
as for a little context for your listeners, and it does have a lot to do with the question about micro traumas. So it's perfect that you asked that.
Good.
I came into the workplace when I was 22 years old. That was my first corporate job. And I had been through childhood trauma that had not been worked on, had not been resolved, came into the workplace, and I pretty much brought that with me because it was still a big part of me. And I was noticing those types of behaviors in the workplace, the micro traumas that were happening. And combined with the trauma I already had experienced, it was like a double whammy for me. My own trauma, and then these micro traumas and bosses who were bullying and things like that. And I found myself continuing to change jobs, thinking it was that particular company or that particular boss. But later realized, again, I needed to be working on my own trauma and dealing with myself, but that there were leaders in the workplace that also had not worked on themselves. They also may have experienced previous trauma. They were bringing those behaviors into the workplace. They were behaving in ways that were causing these micro traumas.
Yes.
So it took me a decade to realize all of that because I kept going from job to job and boss to boss. But later, as I went forward on my own journey and began working on myself, I used the framework that we're going to talk about today. At that time, I did not know it was a framework. It came intuitively to me to be developing myself in that way. And later I realized that it was exactly what I needed to develop myself. And now I use it with my coaching clients. And to tell you the truth, it's not a new framework. The 8 dimensions of wellness, I think long ago it was the 3 dimensions, and then it was the 5 dimensions. So at this point, it's the 8 dimensions. But what I have found is that you can go online, look it up, you can read about it, but nobody really knows how to implement it into their life. So we'll talk today about the framework that I've come up with to implement this and to help people realize maybe which dimension should be a priority, because some people may have worked on some of the dimensions already, but not others. And it really needs to be a balanced approach. So that's what we'll talk about today. And before I start in on those, I'll pause just to see if either of you have any questions about anything I just said, because that was a lot.
I'm like, I have my notepad and my pen ready.
Yeah.
I hope I don't forget that I'm a host. So we'll see.
Yes.
Well, you've got
all
2
good.
more who can take over for you if you forget, right?
There you
Thank
go.
you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful. Awesome.
So I am going to share my screen, and I know that your listeners cannot see this, but at some point it will be showing on YouTube, I think,
Yes.
where they can see it. Okay.
Mhm.
So what I have here is the 8 dimensions, and are both of you seeing that?
Yes,
Yes.
we are.
Okay, great. And they are not in any particular order. Like I said, everyone's in a different place in their life with this, but I'll read them off first and then I'll go back and we'll cover them in more detail. There's physical wellness, which is the physical body, intellectual wellness, which is about the knowledge, the learning that you do, emotional wellness, which is your ability to deal with stress, relaxation, self-awareness, things like that, relationship wellness. So this is your interpersonal relationships and community, spiritual wellness, environmental wellness. So that could be anywhere from your work environment, the office environment, to something broader about related to your community and the things that you do within the community. Occupational wellness, which is your job, and then financial wellness. So those are the 8 dimensions. And what I found as I started on my journey is that I was very much geared toward the physical wellness. That's pretty much where it started for me. And I got involved in physical wellness just to help reduce my stress from these corporate jobs and what I was dealing with in the corporate jobs. Later, that led to me getting involved in competitive bodybuilding. I sort of took it to the extreme because I was just so fascinated and a bit obsessed by physical wellness. So that's where it pretty much started for me. But then further on my journey, I began working on my emotional wellness, the spiritual wellness, and I did all of that through therapy and trauma work and things like that. So when I work with individuals in coaching, and when this comes up, because eventually in coaching, even though it's not therapy, things get shared as we're working through things. Yes. So I will intuitively know when to introduce this framework, and I'll mention it. I'll mention what it is, and then we'll go through what you're seeing here. And we'll look through the definition of each of these. And usually this entire framework resonates with people because they'll either say, oh, my physical wellness is not doing well. I'm not sleeping or eating right. I can't make time to exercise, or my relationships are not doing well. There's usually things that jump out here at them. So I developed a self-assessment because, again, in coaching, it's not really about me telling them where we should start with this or where I think they should start. So I administer a self-assessment where they rate themselves on these 8 dimensions and the explanation of them, and we go deeper into it. And then after they rate themselves, that helps us prioritize where to start, because you can't work on all of them at the same time because it's a lot of work. So you have to start somewhere. So we take that self-assessment, prioritize, and then with their permission, we start on the one that seems to be in the worst condition. And I then implement another tool, which is called a goal setting tool. And it is really kind of taken from a corporate concept called the OKRs. And it's creating an objective statement, looking at what key results you want, and what tasks are you going to do to get those results. So I use those 3 pieces in the framework as they're working on this. And I'll give you an example. In the framework, it asks for what is the goal of that particular part of wellness. So if someone is telling me their physical wellness is not good, then I will ask them to create a goal statement, a 1-sentence statement about what they want to do about that goal. So an example of a goal statement for physical wellness, and it has to start with a verb, it has to start with an action. So it could be something as simple as enhance physical wellness, period. That could be a goal statement that they want to enhance physical wellness. But that's not really clearly defined. So then we dig deeper, and I might say, okay, how are you going to measure that? How are you going to define enhancement? What's the outcome that you want? So then they have to really think about it. And this isn't all done in one session. It's multiple sessions over a long time. They might go away and think about it. They might have to talk to their physician. They might have to, talk to their family, but they might come back and say, I'll know that I achieved this if I have lost 20 pounds and I am sleeping 8 hours every night and my body fat is at 24%. So those would be the measurements that we would use to gauge their progress on this particular area of wellness. And the third piece of this is, okay, what now are you going to do about it? What tasks, what actions are you going to take to achieve that outcome? And then we put together a plan, an action plan of anywhere from 5 to 8 tasks that they're going to do to drop the weight, to reduce the body fat, to be sleeping better. So an example of a task might be for sleeping, I'm going to get to bed on time. I'm going to get to bed at 10 o'clock every night, period. I'm going to stop everything I'm doing and get to bed at 10 o'clock and at least make the effort to not stay up all night. I'm shutting off my devices, getting to bed. Another example of a task could be that they're going to begin working with a personal trainer, or they're going to begin having their physical and getting their blood work done so that they can start measuring what's happening in their body, or they're going to start exercising X number of times per day or times per week or hours per day. So we put together a step-by-step plan that will help them achieve that outcome, which will go back to their goal statement, enhance physical wellness.
Yeah. If I can intervene really quick, Monique. So I love that we're starting with the physical wellness because I know a lot of people at the very beginning of the year, one of the main goals is to lose weight. And I love that you also specify enhancing physical wellness is not a very good goal because it doesn't have it's very vague per se. But one of the struggles that they face, and I it would probably help with the other wellness too, is how do they keep at it? So in your experience with your clients, I know you help them with the objectives or object statement, right? The key results and then the task. How in their journey for whatever that goal is, how do you like craft a game plan as to how they can keep getting the results and I'm just gonna make it an example, and this keeps coming up is I how maybe a routine in losing weight is having a day break, just one day cheat day, but the excuse that was given is I don't want to have a cheat day because I'm going to start eating so much and then the next day it's harder to go back. So how can we flip that mentality per se in that specific situation?
Well, I think the support system is important. I'm only one part of the support system that they should have. If we're talking about physical wellness, then like I said, a lot of them will enlist the help of a trainer and a doctor and their family. So all of these people contribute to their support system, which goes back to accountability, keeping them on track and on the plan. And then in coaching, we do talk about the mindset behind it, that it is okay if that's what they have decided to have a cheat meal, or if that's what they and their trainer have come up with, that is okay. And we talk about the mindset of that and what will happen if they don't take that cheat meal and what will happen if they do. Normally they don't take it because they're afraid they'll fall off the plan.
Yep.
Yeah. So when they do take it, then we look at, okay, what happened? Did you actually really fall off the plan? Usually it's a story we tell ourselves in our own head.
Right.
And as soon as we see a different story or a different possibility, it helps to break that talk track a little bit.
Monique, a question for you. Going through these particular 8 different wellness for lack of a better word.
Dimensions.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Wellness dimensions. You know, you're working on them one at a time, or do you work on several of them at a time? Or because my question would be, if you're working on them like one at a time, and you're honing in on one specific, maybe physical wellness, or maybe it's intellectual wellness. My question is the sustainability of it, because if you move on to the next one, then you have to sustain what you've learned in the previous one.
Right.
So how does that look? I mean, how do people work through that?
Well, the tool that we create, the OKR tool, has everything documented in it. That's their documented action plan. So that is reviewed in the coaching sessions with every session. It's not really packed away and forgotten about. It's there in front of us with every session. So that's part of it. The other part to your question, we don't always work on it one at a time, because sometimes one ties into another one.
Good. Yes.
So for example,
could you give an example of that? Yeah.
Yes. The physical wellness could tie into emotional wellness because of stress, relieving stress once you're working on your body, things like that. So many of these things can tie in, and we can actually start addressing a few of them simultaneously. So that's the other part of it. But the accountability comes in coaching, where I'll say to them, okay, we might be working on relationship wellness in the next few sessions, but before we start those sessions, please give me an update on how you're doing on the physical wellness piece. Or so we start every session with a debrief of the previous dimension that they're working on.
Got it.
I love that. Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have one last question, and we'll dive in on each
Sure.
dimensions. I know each, like, physical wellness is it the same with everyone as to how it looks like from one individual to another?
No, it's not, because everyone is in a different place with their physical wellness. Some people, for example, they exercise all the time. They feel like they're great and on track with exercising, but their nutrition is off kilter.
Gotcha.
So they're not balanced there. And sometimes it becomes obvious to them that they need to enlist the help of like a dietitian, because they may have underlying health issues that need to be addressed, and they can't just jump into a nutrition plan without consulting a professional. So it is different for everyone.
Gotcha.
Is there one particular dimension that is prominent in most people?
It would be physical, usually.
Okay.
Similar to when it was mentioned about New Year's resolutions, a lot of people make the resolution to get healthier physically. So that does seem to be a really common one.
Got it. Good. Okay, cool.
Awesome. What about intellectual wellness? Do you mind walking us through that?
Dive in on that one. Yeah.
That comes up a lot, because that's related to the learning that you do. And most people in the business world need to keep learning. They need to keep expanding their skill set. It either comes up on their performance evaluation that they need to be doing more in these areas, or they just got a promotion and they need to upskill quickly, or they know for themselves that in order to get a promotion, they need to be doing some learning. So I have a different tool that I use for that. It's called a personal learning plan, a PLP, where we map out what they want their learning to be for the whole year. What kind of courses do they want to take? Do they want to do self-study? Is there a certification they need to get? And we input timelines so that they can stay on track with that. So the intellectual wellness is another really big one for people in the workplace, so that they can keep learning.
Gotcha. And I think we have a couple of minutes. Can we touch on, because I know you touch physical wellness, intellectual, emotional can be handled while dealing with the
Yes.
physical wellness. What about relationship wellness, Monique?
Well, from what I learned in my own journey, my relationships really suffered because I hadn't worked on myself. I hadn't worked on my own trauma, and I was being re-traumatized in the workplace. So relationship wellness is very important, because it hit all types of relationships, work relationships, personal, family. So it is important to have that assessed. And we, again, do that by talking through where they think they're at with it, which types of relationships are suffering. Some people are just fine at work, but at home is where they're having the problem, or vice versa. So depending on that, again, with the support system, if they're really suffering at home with the relationships, then it's sometimes a good idea for them to go into therapy around that. If they're dealing with relationship issues at work, then we have to look at what's happening there, because if people are being bullied at work, or they're dealing with those micro traumas, then that's a different kind of action plan. And sometimes it means escalating it within the workplace.
Gotcha. Wow, amazing. This is going by so fast. We will have to take a quick break. Monique just shared 4 dimensions so far out of the 8 and touched a little bit on a couple of them. When we return, we will dive into the rest of the dimensions. We will be right back to the Leader's Edge.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Leader's Edge. I'm Steve Steele with my co-host Ernie DeCumos and our special guest today, Monique Daigneault. Monique, that was pretty fascinating. We went through 4 of the dimensions, and all of them were just fascinating subjects to talk about. I think we could probably spend all day on one at a time, but I want to touch back on relationships just a little bit, because I know that I've experienced this, and I know that others have as well. You know, you relationships that are in the workplace. You know, you have your relationships with each other in the workplace, and then you have your relationships at home. And I have found out in my experience that oftentimes people who are struggling with relationships at home, it kind of transfers to work. And then all of a sudden the work performance suffers because of that. I've experienced that in my own life. So what do we do, Monique? How do we work through that?
Well, when I'm working with someone related to relationship wellness, we dissect what they think is happening. And if they do think that something is happening at home and they're bringing it into the workplace, or if I'm coaching a leader who notices this about their employees, then we have to look at it. It can get a little bit tricky, because in the workplace, a leader has to be careful of bringing that up to their employees, going into the personal realm with the employees. So really, as a leader, what's important and what I coach them on is, if you're seeing an employee who is suffering in their performance, you have to bring the performance issue to their attention. And then out of that, you'll find information, you'll hear information from the employee. They'll usually say eventually something's happening at home, things like that. But many leaders are afraid to give feedback, performance feedback, to their people, which is another area I have to coach them on. It's important to give the feedback. And even when the leader knows that something's happening at home, then they're even more hesitant to give more feedback if the performance hasn't improved. But the bottom line is that an employee at work has to do their work. They have to perform. And if you bring it to their attention and you give them feedback and they're still not performing, You can refer them to the company EAP if there is one.
Mm-hmm.
I coach leaders to be a resource for their people, to know where to direct their people so that their people can get help. The leader can't solve the problem for the employee, but you can be a resource to give them information, to help them create a support system for themselves. And at times it's even resulted in leaders have had to put people on performance improvement plans because
Mhm.
they've given feedback. Maybe there's still an issue going on at home, but the bottom line is that the performance is not improving and the leader has no choice but to take that next step and to escalate it. It's really the employee's responsibility to take care of themselves and to take care of whatever issues they are having. And I can relate it back to my situation in the workplace. I brought all my trauma into the workplace. I didn't work on it for many years. My performance was suffering also. But eventually I got it through my head that I was the one that needed to take that step to start dealing with the issues I was having. So I think sometimes leaders take on more accountability than they should for their people, and it disempowers their people and it keeps their people from doing the work that they need to do. So that's how I work with them in coaching. If my coaching client is the person that is having the performance issues, it's the same thing. You've got to get help for yourself. What kind of help do you need? Here's some resources. Have you used the company EAP? Things like that. So it can get very much into the weeds when it comes to that piece
Oh
of it.
yeah. Oh yeah.
I do have a question, and I think somebody might be asking this question. You mentioned earlier, Monique, that you recognize that you're bringing the traumas in at your work. What was that moment that helped you identify that? Because a lot of times people don't know that they're doing that, if I'm not mistaken. So, what
No,
was
you're
your
right. Yes, you're
Yeah.
very right. And that kind of takes us into spiritual wellness, which is the
Mhm.
next piece here. And for any listeners that have just joined us, I'm sharing my screen and I have the list of 8 dimensions of wellness here, which is why I keep looking away. I keep looking at the screen so I won't end up on the wrong one that we're talking about. But spiritual wellness, I started to get really involved in expanding my spirituality in various ways. Reading, taking some classes, trying to explore more in that realm. And by doing that, I became very reflective. And I personally think that when you take time to reflect and you take quiet time and you're reflecting and you're journaling, insights will come to you. I feel that we already have our own answers inside, but many of us, there's so much noise around that we don't have time to really dig deep into ourselves. So I started to do a lot of deep spiritual work. And I don't know if it was an actual moment in time where there was this realization. It was more of a consistent insight that kept growing and growing, telling me that, okay, I had these issues as a child and this behavior is affecting me. Plus I had my own support system. I got into therapy. And so had therapists there for me, helping me to unpack this. And in coaching, one of the really big pieces of coaching is that we encourage self-reflection. We encourage them to think about their action plan and journal and develop their self-awareness. That's part of emotional intelligence. So in coaching, that can be a support piece also for someone, their coach, being in coaching, showing up for their coaching sessions, having a therapist. I work with a lot of people who are also working with a therapist simultaneously to working with me. And it's a really great combination because I can help them with the pieces that are happening at work. I'm not allowed to dive deep with them into trauma or anything like that. But then their therapist can be helping them with the past traumas and the childhood issues and things like that.
Gotcha.
Man, that's so many. I mean, these questions keep popping up in my head, and I know we don't have time for all these questions, so we're going to go ahead and move on, because the spiritual part of it, I really had a question. The spiritual part is really being present with yourself and having those, like you said, those quiet moments, right?
Yes.
And that's so important. And I know that actually helps me when I actually have those times. But let's dive into the environmental wellness a little bit, Monique. That's
Now,
interesting.
environmental wellness is really interesting because it can span a huge gamut. It can span something as small as your home environment, even your office, your individual office where you are all day, a work environment where you're in the larger building all day. But it can also span as broadly as your community. Are you living in a safe community? You know, many people in the workplace, they're not safe. They don't feel safe outside of the workplace.
Can you define that?
Safe?
Yes.
Safety?
In the workplace, define that.
Safety in the workplace, I define as, you know, the absence of that bullying behavior, the absence of micro traumas. I think some people do feel safe in the workplace, but outside of the workplace, they don't. Where, because they're living maybe in an unsafe home or an unsafe relationship or a community that's not safe.
Yeah. I was actually chatting with a different person the other day about their workplace, and they felt they weren't safe in their workplace because they weren't being heard.
Oh, yes.
Ooh.
Yes.
You know,
when you don't have
they
a
just feel like
voice,
when you don't have a voice, and you're just constantly getting put more pressure on you and more pressure on you and more pressure on you, and you can say something, but it doesn't seem to make any difference, and they don't feel safe in that environment. Does that make sense?
It does. And it falls under the umbrella of psychological safety. And in the workplace, that's also a big issue right now, is that people don't feel psychologically safe, which is similar to what you're saying. They don't have a voice. If they're afraid, if they do speak up, they'll be reprimanded, or there will be
not a team player or something like that. Yeah.
Right. Or there will be retaliation. I've had clients that have escalated a toxic boss to HR after we've worked through it in coaching. They tried to give their boss feedback. They tried to say how they felt. They weren't heard. The boss's toxic behavior continued. They escalated it to HR, and they were the ones that they were retaliated against. And that is truly a lack of safety, zero psychological safety, a 100% toxic environment. And many people do go to work every day in fear that they have to just keep their head down, do their work, because if they do or say anything otherwise, they may lose their job. And that's an awful way to have to live.
Yeah, it's not. Does that overlap with the occupational wellness, Monique?
That's a really great question and a great segue into that. Yes.
All right, Ernie.
Yes. So occupational wellness is the development of your satisfaction at work, your vocational satisfaction. So it's doing a job you love, first of all, being in something that you really enjoy. And if you end up not enjoying it, finding something else that you do enjoy. But then, yes, being safe, because sometimes you can love your job. You can be in what you would consider have great occupational wellness because you love your job. But if you don't feel safe at work, if there's no psychological safety, then that's going to cause you to be really unhappy at work. It won't matter how much you did love your job. If you're not safe there, you're not going to want to stay.
Yeah, I was reading the other day in a particular book, and it stated about what they called, I think, workplace orientation is what it was. And there's 3 phases to that. One is you go to work and it's your job. The second one is you go to work and it's your career. And the third one, you go to work and it's your calling. And when I look at the situations that I've been in, in a situation, it certainly hadn't been my calling, and it's certainly not my career level. So it's my job. So if I'm at my job, then it's just a stepping stone to the next place. Does that make sense?
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
if it's a career advancement, if you're looking for career, you're going to stay with that company for a while. And if it's a calling, you just love, love, love being there all the time and doing that. I mean, a calling for Ernie and I is what we do today.
Right.
Adding value to people. That's a calling to us. That's why we
Mhm.
love doing this. We'll spend hours and hours. And Monique, you're the same way. You spend hours and hours and hours wanting to add value and help people. And so, can you did that make sense? How do
It really
people look?
does. And I think it also ties into spiritual wellness. I mean,
Mm.
could you both say that for the two of you, that it
Yes.
ties into your spiritual wellness?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think it's important for people to understand where they're at in that framework of occupational wellness. I remember in my early days in my corporate career when I was 22, I was also a single parent of two toddlers at the same time. And all I wanted to do was make money. I had to make money to survive. I wasn't getting child support. And at that point, that would have been considered just my job. I was there to clock in and clock out. I didn't care about anything. I didn't even at the time care about advancement. I just needed to survive. And there are many people in the workplace like that, and there's no judgment against that because we are all in different situations based on things that have happened to us. So
Right.
then eventually I was able to get promoted and I started looking at it more like a career, like where am I going to go here? What's my next step? I started looking more at the long-term plan. And in coaching, when I work with people on occupational wellness, many of them are wondering that, what's my plan? What's my next step? What's my career trajectory? How do I get there? And then I use a different tool to help them. I'm big on tools, as you could probably tell.
Yes. We can't tell. We had like 3 tools already.
I know. And there's more I haven't even shared
Yes.
yet.
I imagine.
But we work on what their long-term path could be in their company. And if they don't see a path for themselves in their company, then we talk about maybe that company isn't where you need to be. And it's a realistic conversation that we have to have. Some people think that just because they've been someplace for 20 years, that means they have to just stay there for another 10. And that's not necessarily the case. We're always evolving. And so is the workplace. So there are times when people are perfectly happy in their job, their occupational wellness is off the charts. And then something happens inside the company. There's a huge change in leadership, or the company gets sold and new leaders come in and take over. Suddenly the culture has changed completely.
Yes.
And now the person is thinking, this does not fit. It doesn't align with maybe my spiritual wellness. It doesn't align with my values.
Exactly.
I don't like what I'm doing here. And then they go through this crisis, really this occupational crisis of, what do I do? I've only ever been here for 20 years and this is all I know. So it can be eye-opening as I'm working with them through these dimensions, and they start seeing for themselves where they're at in each dimension, and then they see how the dimensions overlap. And that's why it's so important to address all of the dimensions, maybe not in the same order or at the same time, but it's important that they understand that one is going to impact the other. It's like a domino effect. And that can be in a good way too. What I found for myself is when I started working on these areas, the other areas started to automatically improve because I was doing my work. Everything intertwines. So it doesn't necessarily mean it'll take 10 years to work on these 8 dimensions. It might happen in a year because everything is interacting with each other.
And it's part of your mindset at that point. Your mindset begins to change, right? And when that changes, everything begins to change.
Right. Your progress can be quicker. So it's huge for people to be able to realize this and work on this.
That is beautiful. I love that. I love that.
I do like the idea of reflecting and spending time with yourself, recognizing where you are today, and I guess at the same time too, recognizing where you want to be in, I don't know, 5 years. But at the same time, with all these progress comes one factor, which is your finances. What does that
Yes.
look like, Monique?
Yes.
That it ties in with the occupational piece too, I'm sure.
It
Mm-hmm.
does. It does. And I really make sure they understand in advance I'm a coach. I'm not a financial expert. So again, part of their support system is to go find a financial planner, work with their financial people, because I can't advise on that. But we do talk about budgeting. Where are you saving, just general high level things like that. Are you making enough money to satisfy your financial goals, or do you need to look at a change in your occupation? So again, that ties in, and everyone is in a different place. I work with people fresh out of college. I work with people that are in their 50s, and I work with people who are about to retire.
Mm.
So the financial wellness is a big piece for everyone, and just having financial goals. Some people don't have goals, and I can help them set the goals, but then they have to work with their financial experts to figure out how they're going to achieve those goals as far as investments and things like that.
Beautiful.
I love that. I love that transparency too, because obviously I think the goal is to recognize if you're set for wellness on that specific dimension, if I'm
Yes.
not mistaken. Okay.
Yes.
Um, Monique, thank you so much for today's teaching. Again, these 8 dimensions. I've come across this just like what you said before. It's not a new concept, but it's something that we don't realize that they connect with each other sometimes. But our listeners are probably wondering, how can they actually first, what are you currently working on, and how can they reach out to you to talk more about these dimensions?
Yes, thank you. Well, as you mentioned, my book, The Survive and Thrive Toolkit for Leaders, was published in July. So I'm working on the second part of that and hope to have that published soon. So that's a big project that I'm working on. And I've been really busy promoting the first book and being a guest on podcasts and doing local book signings and speaking and things like that. So busy with all of that, and still busy with a full coaching roster. And anyone can reach me at Monique at mdconsultingglobal.com. My website is the same thing, mdconsultingglobal.com. And on that website, there are a lot of free resources. There's a place to purchase the book. The book is on Amazon, but you can go to my website and get it from there also. And they can book a complimentary consultation with me to see if we would be a good fit in working together.
Wonderful. That's beautiful.
Partner, you want to talk
Yes.
about next week?
Yes, I can. I can talk about next week. A little sneak peek, Ernalita. Next Thursday on the Leader's Edge, a guest we've had on the show before. She's co-hosting because Ernalita, you're going to be gone. So,
What are
yeah.
you trying to say?
Yeah, I know. We're going to have our co-host, Dory Lamara. Yeah, she's wonderful. We just love her to death. She's so much fun. She's going to join us next week as we welcome the leadership whisperer herself, Erica Kelly. She'll share insights on the purpose path from seeking to living what you're meant for. So don't miss it. Everybody be there next week. And as always, Monique, thank you so much for today. Just amazing information. I do want to talk to you briefly off air. I do have another question, but we'll talk about that off air.
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me. I have thoroughly enjoyed myself, Ernie and Steve.
Thank you again, Monique. And we wanted to say thank you to all of our listeners and friends, because without you, the Leader's Edge would not be possible. We are excited to connect with you, but for